for staying up later. I'm Pat Sajak in for Bob Costas this week. In addition to being, as you saw, one of the nation's finest comic talents, Edwin Newman has had a fair to middling career in the journalism business as well. And if you don't mind, we'll start with that aspect
Please do.
of your life. You know, I don't know of any period in American journalism that has been more tumultuous than this. I mean, the networks are in turmoil and cutting back. Cable television has become a big factor in the game. In print, there's soul-searching going on about the very nature of news coverage. The line between tabloid and so-called straight press has become blurred. What paths are we going now? What's happening here? Can you make some sense of this?
Well, to the extent that I can make sense of it, Pat, I think it has a great deal to do with technological development. The changes that come about in the news business very often are caused simply by what might be called technological or scientific advances. In the old days of television news, when I was in Europe, we had to know what the airline schedules were to ship our film. Sometimes it would be lost. Then the jet plane came along. That speeded everything up. And satellites came along.
It also strikes me on the subject of technology that in some ways our ability to go live has hurt the nature of news coverage. So often I'll see a live report on a newscast that is live for the sake of being live, so if the fellow can stand out in front of the building, he doesn't need to be there. And he tends to ramble on, and the information is not nearly as concise and informative as it could have been with some good editing and some post-judgment.
Yes, you want to be able to show that you are at the scene, that your organization is there, that you're represented at the place. So you go to your correspondent there. Now, of course, also, if you have correspondents at various places, in effect, you have an investment in having those correspondents and camera crews at those places, and you want to get something out of it, so you go there. But because of the tremendous cost and the competition you referred to, Pat, there's going to be less and less of this. There's going to be much more pool coverage. There's going to be much more cooperative coverage. You see British reports now on American television. You see some American reports on British television, that kind of thing. Once in a great while, something will go wrong, and then you will want to have your own coverage, but for most of it, and why have 30 people on the presidential press plane?
Yeah. A little overkill there. You, as an example of the problems there can be in live coverage, sometimes events are such that they have to be covered live. For example, the attempt on President Reagan's life, you were anchoring the coverage of that for NBC News. And with the press of details, some misinformation was given out over the airways. I think one said Mr. Brady had been killed, which of course he had not. I think there was a reference to open heart surgery by President Reagan.
Yes, that was from a reporter on NBC as it happened.
And you, as the anchor, have to go back and say, whoops, sorry. Folks.
Yes, well, in the case of the report of open heart surgery, I did question it immediately, and fortunately we had a physician, a surgeon, to whom we could turn. And so we were able to correct ourselves on that one. Mm-hmm. The Brady information, or misinformation, of course, came from the White House, but that was not the only misinformation. At first we were told that Mr. Reagan had not been hit. Now, in those circumstances, these things are bound to happen.
Sure. Sometimes
they'll happen. And it isn't malicious or anything of that sort.
But that's where you, as the person out front, have to really keep your cool. If I remember, was it Frank Reynolds over at ABC who really kind of lost it on the air, when, especially on the Brady thing. He really got upset about it.
Yes, he did.
Oh, my goodness. I must apologize. I hope that what I've been reporting is all wrong, but I am now told, people talking in my ear here, that there are conflicting reports that Jim may well be alive yet. I hope it's true. Obviously, we all hope it's true, but we did have reports from the hospital earlier and from the White House that he had passed away. We know that he was in very critical condition. Let's get it nailed down, somebody. Let's find out. Let's get the word here, and let's get it straight so that we can report this accurately.
And I have a theory about that, Pat, because I knew Frank, as so many of us in the news business did, and he had been doing this kind of thing. I don't mean blowing up. I mean he had been handling emergencies on the air for years and years and years. He was not the kind of man to blow up. He didn't live very long after that, and I believe that the illness that killed him probably was taking its toll at that time. That is the only explanation I can think of for the fact that Frank Reynolds did become angry, loses temper, loses self-control for a moment.
That makes sense.
It made there was no other possible explanation.
How many presidential debates did you moderate?
Well, I moderated the first one between Ford and Carter, moderated the second one between Reagan and Mondale, and I moderated a good many among candidates for the two parties, but party by party, so to speak, Republican debates, Democratic debates.
You were put in an interesting position in the Reagan-Mondale debate, as I recall, because the President Reagan was giving his closing statement, and to be honest, was meandering a bit down California Highway 1, as I recall.
Yes, he had made that a metaphor for the United States.
Yes, and somehow made a left turn in his metaphor, but the point is time ran out. You had to cut the President of the United States off. A bit of an awkward
It was
position.
awkward. I was listening to him and looking at the watch, and I heard the producer, Wally Westfeld, an old NBC friend and colleague who was producing this for the League of Women Voters. Heard Wally tell me through the IFB. That's interrupted feedback.
I never knew it. I've been in broadcasting all my life. I had no idea what that stood for.
And Wally said, "Wrap him up," which is a familiar phrase, of course, to anybody
It's the
in the
President
business.
we're talking about here.
George Bush and I have crisscrossed the country, and we've had, in these last few months, a wonderful experience. We have met young America. We have met your sons and daughters.
Mr. President, I am obliged to cut you off there under the rules of the debate. I'm sorry.
All right? I was just going to... Okay.
When I went up to see him later, say, "Mr. President, I'm sorry, had to cut you off. The rules required it." He gave me a typical Reagan reply. He just grinned and he said, "I had a great last line."
But that was his great charm.
Yes, he was very disarming.
It truly was. You have been there, of course, for so many momentous events in this country, and with the nature of news, so many of them are tragic events.
Yes.
Do you just get a kind of emotional callous as you report all these things, and from assassinations and coups and deaths, or how do you avoid becoming a cynic about life when you see this sort of underbelly of our culture all the time?
I think you don't become cynical because when these things happen, and as you say, when these dreadful things happen, of course you're affected by them, and of course you're made sad. And you think to yourself, can this really have happened? Am I really talking about this again? Because it does happen so often. But if you're in the business, if you're in the news business, particularly if you've had the kind of training I was lucky enough to have, which was wire service training, you know that you cannot spend any time thinking thoughts that cannot be used. If you're in print, they must get on the page. If you're on the air, you must broadcast them. You cannot spend any time thinking about something you cannot use.
Was the Kennedy assassination, which you covered for NBC Radio, was that the most difficult time to put that into effect, separating your emotions from the story?
No, I think it wasn't. Pat, I think in a way it was more difficult when Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, when Robert Kennedy was killed, because it was this succession of such events. And you really did say to yourself, can I be saying this? Is this really happening? And it was more difficult to put that out of your mind on those occasions simply because this had, by that time, happened so often.
Good afternoon. I'm Edwin Newman. President Johnson has declared this a national day of mourning for Dr. Martin Luther King.
Whether it was covering those live events or being involved in day-to-day journalism, you've had a pretty good career for a guy whose voice was described once as sounded like a rusty muffler.
Rusty muffler, I think that was it.
And
not a bad name for a news broadcaster.
it wouldn't be bad. But you talk about pretty boy anchors, and while you're a fine, distinguished-looking gentleman, we would not put you in that category. We use the rusty muffler thing. You've got to think you've done okay despite those tags.
Yes, and when I think back to what I expected when I began in the business in 1941, in newspaper work and wire service work, remembering what the pay was, yes, on the whole, I think I've been lucky.
You never thought you'd ever get a taste. You never thought that it could be this good. Just tell me what you want and I'll find the key. Just reach out and touch, it's all yours. If you hang long enough, you'll do it. Well, just hang long enough.
The preceding program has been a presentation of NBC News, which is solely responsible for its content.
We're back with Edwin Newman. We've been talking about broadcast journalism, but one of the things that has set you apart from your colleagues is you have been willing throughout the years to share a laugh, to have a little fun with your image and sort of the stodgy image of newsmen in general. First of all, how has that sat with your colleagues, both in management and on-air people?
It's a bit complicated because there was a feeling that if you, certainly among some people in news, that if you fooled around on the air, you might be detracting from the authority with which you could speak on a serious subject. It was an NBC News Department executive who said to me when I was working on the Today Show, if you insist on wearing funny hats, who's going to believe you when you're talking about China? Well, I think it's a fair criticism, and I think this is a point on which news people differ. But my own view has always been that the audience is perfectly well able to tell when you're fooling around and when you're serious.
You seem to have been able to keep that balance. But in fairness, you haven't. What you make work for you is going against the grain of the image. I mean, you really don't often wear funny hats. Although on Saturday Night Live, as a gang member, as I recall, you did wear something that was not in keeping with your usual attire.
Yes.
You disrupt.
A piece very early in my career with NBC. Somebody in New York had read or heard a story that ducks were nesting in trees in London, where I happened to be working at the time, and asked for a story about it. Well, I tried to find out whether ducks actually do nest in trees, and as far as I could find out from authorities in the field, there weren't any. But anyway, we went out to a park, and I climbed a tree, and speaking of hats, I put on a Sherlock Holmes hat. And I blew whatever horn hyphen whistle sort of thing that duck hunters use to attract ducks, and up in the tree I blew this thing with a camera on me.
Wait, let me just get this image in my mind. Edwin Newman is in a tree with a Sherlock Holmes hat blowing a duck call. All right, I've got it. All right, now from there.
I could have said it that briefly if I were better at that. And of course no ducks appeared. So we did this a few times, and then I turned to the camera and I told, speaking to New York, I said, if ducks nest in trees in London, it's logical to believe they do so in the United States as well. So my advice to you is to get quacking. That was the end of that. Yes.
The comedy career.
Yes.
I've also seen you sing on the air. It's interesting with non-singers, and if you don't mind my calling you a non-singer.
No, not a bit.
And I've done this too, fooling around with singing. You know, you're doing it as a lark, but about 5 notes into it, you begin to think, you know, I might be able to pull this off. And you really start trying, and that's when it gets funny.
Yes, but if I may say so, that's the second thought. The first thought comes just before you begin singing.
Yeah. Why am I doing this with me?
A certain nervousness takes over.
I now remember you from Dave Letterman's morning show, and you did the news.
Yes, and there were certain problems that were attendant upon that, I guess one would say, because after all, this was a lighthearted show. David Letterman's show would have to be. And sometimes the news would be grim.
And you had an audience there?
Yes, and you had a studio audience, which, when you were introduced, applauded you, because studio audiences applaud everybody at talk shows. And then another factor was that because it was a studio audience, which of course laughed if you worked any funny lines into your script, you tended to try to write funny lines. Well, eventually, the problem was solved by putting me into a separate studio.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was solved still more when the show went off the air.
You mentioned being on the Today Show, and we think of you from nightly news, but in neither of those cases were you ever the sole. You were always subbing someone.
Yes.
Did I ever gnaw at you a little bit? Did you?
Yes.
Yeah.
It did.
You jumped right in there with that one. Were you ever close to doing any of those things?
I think I was. I know, for example, I'd see my picture in the paper occasionally, one of a number of people being considered for this job or that job. That certainly happened with the Today Show. And I know there were times when there was some talk about my moving in on nightly news, but it never happened.
When you did my CBS talk show, I was, you're sort of an unofficial language cop, I guess, is what we'll call you. You have a great affection for the American tongue, and you poke holes in some of the abuses of it. So I was determined. I consider that I speak okay. How's that for a colloquial? And I was. You were going to be on the show about midway through the show, so I thought, I'm worried about it the whole show. Ed Newman's going to be out here. I'm not going to screw up. I'm going to pay attention to everything I say. Come out of the curtain. We shake hands. You sit down. I go, you know, Ed. You said, don't start a sentence with you know. What is you know? And I mean, are we just lazy there? Are we trying to fill up
think
space?
so, and I think at first it came about because people wanted to be assured that what they were saying was understood, that they were making themselves clear, and it caught on. And it became fashionable to say it. It's a strange thing to believe, but I do believe it. In the 60s, it became fashionable to say it because many people, especially young people then, wanting to show that they were not associated with the establishment, tried to limit their vocabularies, tried not to speak well. It was a very strange development in this country. And you have people aspiring to speak more poorly than they were capable of doing.
Now, in your role as a watchdog of our language, you made an appearance on Newhart.
Yes.
One night, and as I recall, Bob, in his role as host of a local cable show, Vermont Today, had some success suddenly becoming sort of a Morton Downey type, yelling at the callers and calling them weenies. That was his big. He called them weenies.
It's an honor to have you here, sir.
Mr. Loudon, when I originally agreed to be a guest on your program, I took it on faith from a publicist, an act of some naivete, I agree, that yours was a program of reasonable quality. I've had occasion these last 2 weeks to watch the program myself, and I have found that it typifies everything that is wrong in television today. So I came on the program to tell you that myself. Now, I intend to leave before you begin your usual name-calling. And by the way, the correct term is not weenie, it is wiener. Good day, Mr. Loudon.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Edwin Newman.
You know, Ed,
Try that one again.
We'll do a retake. Ed, it's great seeing you again. You always lend a touch of class to anything you do, whether you're wearing a funny hat or covering an event which touches all our lives.
Thank you for having me.
Edwin
Pleasure to see you.
And I'm Pat Sajak for Bob Costas. We'll see you later.
One is the very model of stability and restraint.
Come on, loosen your tie.
No.
One is reckless, wild, and untamed.
Come on, put on a tie.
Never.
Two brothers who can't agree on anything.
I would have phrased it differently.
Not me.
Wings, back on NBC Thursday. To some, it was the fulfillment of a dream. To others, the ultimate weapon.
What you got in there?
But to Cliff Secord, it was just an innocent discovery.
I wouldn't touch that if I... I mean, look, like a hood ornament.
A discovery that will lead to the adventure of his life.
I want that rocket. Not next week, not tomorrow. Now.
Oh, we got company. You steer on point,
Jenny's in trouble. They're working for a Nazi agent.
Shoot him! We've got the girl. The rocket will come to us.
I love her, Pete.
Does she know that?
She's gonna find out.
Hand over the rocket.
Here he comes.
The Rocketeer.
Go get him, kid.
Rated PG. Starts Friday at a theater near you.
Classic television. Happy birthday, NBC.
Hickory dickory dock, time to beat the clock.
I've got a secret. Time now for everybody's favorite guessing game, What's My Line? And we're all here to play password. Here's the star of that game, Gene Rivers. The Family Feud. And now, here is the star of The Price is Right,
Thanks for staying up later. I'm Pat Sajak, sitting in for Bob Costas this week. What did those shows you saw just have in common? Well, they were all produced under the banner of Goodson Todman, and Mark Goodson is with us tonight. In fact, that was really just the tip of the iceberg, which would not be a bad name for a game show.
Tip of the iceberg, very
What
good.
do you think? Let's talk about What's My Line. It's a show that ran in its original incarnation for, what, 17 seasons, Sunday nights on CBS. As simple a show, you could, I assume, describe it in 10 seconds.
Yes, two parts. We had a panel of celebrities bring up somebody with an interesting occupation. They would play a game that's very similar to 20 questions. 10, and the prize is $50. That's all you got. And then at the end, we would blindfold the panel, bring out a famous mystery guest who would squeak or snort or change his voice or her voice. And they'd guess who he was, and the show would be over. And it was dominant for at least a decade.
And you attracted some very impressive names as mystery guests. I mean, everyone from Carl Sandburg to soon-to-be presidents to major celebrities.
Eleanor Roosevelt, Helen Hayes, people outside the theater, Warren, who was later to become the Supreme Court judge. You know, John Daly, who was our host, married his daughter. I don't know if they met on the show or not.
And they all did funny voices.
All did funny voices, yes, all of them.
The reception was accorded you makes me feel that your face is reasonably familiar to the public. Is that correct?
Well, sir, I just don't know.
Judging from the applause, I take it that you are a performer.
Are you primarily a movie star? I'm quite sure. Am I a motion picture performer? Yeah. Sometimes.
mask on and you're all covered up. You'll never guess who we are now.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but John Daly, the host, the witty and urbane host of What's My Line, was he not, at the same time he was doing What's My Line on CBS, a panel show, was he not also anchoring the ABC Evening News during the same year?
Not only was he anchoring it, he was, in effect, the head of ABC News. I don't know whether he was the president or vice president. He was, this is, of course, unheard of today. You know,
I mean, can you see Tom Brokaw spinning the wheel?
Where game shows are not kosher anymore. But in those days, it was fine, and you could swing for one of the, Walter Cronkite, for a brief period of time, was a host of a game show of ours. Of course, it was a news game, called It's News to Me. Mike Wallace, before he became sanctified by becoming a newsman, did the pilot of To Tell the Truth. Of course, he was not a newsman yet. He had to be laundered first, and then he came back, cleaned up, and Daly. Daly was first, he had just been, we found him. He had just been let go by CBS News. But he was a newsman, and he's always resented somewhat the fact that people knew him, began to know him all over the country as the host of What's My Line. Elegant as the show was, and it was indeed an elegant show, black tie and the best mystery guests in the world, Daly secretly resented the fact that he was known as a game showman.
Would I be likely, Mrs. Marston, to avail myself of your services? In the broadest possible sense,
I think, Johnny, that's a very fair answer. Mrs. Marston said it would depend. There are circumstances under which it would be possible. This is not to say that you specifically would ever come upon such circumstances, but it could happen.
John, whenever you talk to me, I always get the feeling I'm in the principal's office in high school for some reason.
How important is an individual host to a show? Could you mix?
How important is it? I would say that yes and no. I think that, for example, for many years, Alan Ludden was Mr. Password. Yet I think the show could be picked up today without him. I think that Bob Barker, I think, is now of the essence. The Price is Right. Yet for 8 years, it was done by Bill Cullen before him. So when he does a brilliant job on the show, but when a man gets identified with the show, very, very hard to shift. The audience, they like the fellow who first did Phantom of the Opera. They don't want a replacement. They like that original face. But I think the game show host is important. I think that if he fits the format, I think that certain hosts are ideal for certain shows.
A brand new password now to Jane Fonda, to James Mason, and as they look at it, you look at it.
The password is spat.
All right, Jane, first clue's yours, worth 10 points.
Spithead.
Now, David, if you whisper your secret to me, the folks at home are anxious to find out what it is.
Something you might accidentally leave on all night. Yes, your shoes. I hope you won't take this the wrong way, Kenneth, but you are weird.
Was there ever a party that says, I don't get some of the respect I deserve because they say it's only game shows?
Well, it's true, absolutely. You know, many years ago, I wrote an article for Variety, and this was in 1958 when What's My Line was at its peak. They weren't as they are today in a daytime ghetto. And I wrote a piece called What's My Status? And it's true. I think for reasons that are hard to define, all game shows are lumped into one monolithic group. I've always felt there are good game shows and lousy ones. And some of ours have been lousy and some of ours have been great. And I think there is yes, I'm known for game shows. And certainly the majority of my money and certainly the majority of my fame has come out of those shows. I perhaps liked it better back in the 50s when we had What's My Line on live at night, and I've Got a Secret on at night, or Password was on at night, and there was more of a feeling of game shows being part of the upper level activity. Now we're more fringe, and I do resist and resent the fact that sometimes We're like the comic strips, in a way. On the other hand, there are some good comic strips, too.
What's My Line?
People play, night or day, they're just not matching what they should do. Keep me feeling blue. Been down too long, right, wrong, I just can't stop it. Been in all day, thinking just of you. Games people play, night or day, they're just not matching what they should do. Keep me feeling blue.
Back with Mark Goodson. What show are you proudest of, just in terms of from the creative side, what you put on the screen and what it accomplished over the years?
I would say I like them all, naturally. They're all fun. I like every one. I think that the one that I happen to be the fondest of is the one that's just been canceled, which is To Tell the Truth, which is on this network. And I like it for a lot of reasons. I like it because it is the closest to being a storytelling reality show. It has real people, one real person, and then two people who are taught very quickly to pretend, to lie. And these people who come up and become imposters adore what they love it. I mean, it's really a form of childhood pretending.
All right, the votes are all in. Now it's time to find out which one of these lovely ladies is the real Mylan. So will the real Mylan please stand up? There you go.
You can't put as many shows on the air as you have done over the years without it having a clinker or two along the way. Do you just move on from those? Do you have any that stand out as one?
Does clinkers?
Yeah.
Clinker to me is any show that lasts under 13 weeks.
I thought you said 13 years.
No, 13 weeks. It's 26 weeks. Sometimes you think they're going to work and they don't.
Andy, how about, rather than looking for the biggest surprise, one you really thought should have worked and didn't?
Well, I had the biggest disaster we ever had. I keep hitting under an old pillow. It was a show I sold directly to Charlie Revson at Revlon. It was before he got the $64,000 question. It was a show that I put on ABC in the days before technology would handle it. It was called What's Going On? And it involved an inside panel and an outside panel. And the inside panel, and it was a major screen behind the heads of the panel. And we would have the outside panel in the strangest places in the world. We'd have a man hanging outside the Empire State Building washing windows. So we'd have somebody on a Mississippi boat dressed as a gambler. We'd have somebody counting sheep in the Chicago stockyard. And what you'd try to guess in the studio is, where are you and what's going on? So you have these people in remote areas doing these crazy things, and you're trying to guess what they're doing.
Just ask questions of those people.
Yeah, like it was a form of I've Got a Secret, except they were really on the spot. Well, it was a disaster.
Now, the audience already knows what's going on. You're going to have to guess it. You can ask questions until you hear this chime. There it is. You'll hear it every 45 seconds, and then we'll pass on to the next question. Now, for an easy question, there'll be 2 or 3 chimes. For a very tough one, as many as 10. How many chimes do we have for this one? 4 chimes. Fine, let's start with Kitty Carlisle.
Who have we got?
I beg your pardon?
Who have we got?
Cliff Norton.
Oh,
I thought you knew that.
I'm sorry. I probably didn't hear you. This has confused me terribly.
We haven't talked about Bill Todman, who died when?
About 10 years ago.
After all, it was Goodson Todman, and you were, as I understand it, really more the creative end of the team, and Bill was involved in selling the product more than anything else. How'd that partnership come to be?
I met Bill when I was, before I got into the business of production, I was a radio host of a show called, a quiz show called The Battle of the Boroughs in New York. I had been in San Francisco, a radio announcer, and I was on a show out there called The Quiz of Two Cities. San Francisco versus L.A., I was the San Francisco host. So when I got into New York and looking for a job, I got the job as the MC for Manhattan. Bill Todman was around. interested in getting into radio in those days. And I told him after I got to know him for a while, he was the only rich kid I ever knew. I was a poor kid. He was a rich kid from Park Avenue. I mean, he was rich because he drove a car in New York, which was unheard of in those days. And I got to tell Bill that I had a little game show that I had done back in San Francisco called Winner Take All, a little quiz show. And I described it to him, and I had an old record I'd made of the show back there in those days before tapes. I had a record, and he said, "Can I try to sell this?" I said, "Sure." And 5 years later, he came to me and said, "I think I have it sold." And CBS put it on without a sponsor, called Sustaining in those days. And that was the first show we did. That's where I discovered Bill Cullen, put Bill Cullen on radio. And that's how I met Bill.
What happened to the blossoming broadcasting career? You were getting off to a good start. You mentioned some of the shows you were doing as a host. How did that?
Well, I was blessed by a tornado, if you will. I had a catastrophe back in the 40s when I was making a modest living, pretty good living, as an announcer and I was a voice on a show called We the People. I was announcing soap operas, and I was a host of a couple of little game shows. I suddenly got hit one evening, with an acute case of mic fright, and like stage fright.
You just froze in front of the mic?
I knew it the night before. I just felt, I went really into a depression, and that was the first signal of it, and I knew that I couldn't announce, and it was a disaster because I had a new child and no way to make a living, and I had to do something, and I went bananas for about 6, 7 months. I ultimately lost the shows because I found it so painful to go to the studio.
It happened that suddenly?
It happened overnight. I heard myself talking to myself and saying, "You're not going to be able to announce tomorrow." And I said back to myself in this little dialogue with the devil, "That's nonsense. Of course I'd be able to announce." The other voice said, "Just try it and see." Well, he was right, whoever this devil was, and I couldn't do it. I mean, I'd been a talker and a performer throughout my life. I was a child actor and a debater, and I was a radio announcer in San Francisco, and I acted in college. I never had stage fright before, and I had it good, and I just was paralyzed, and I couldn't move, and that put me into production.
This has been a Mark Goodson, Bill Todman production.
We invested $100 million in the latest diagnostic equipment, and another $5 million a year training our expert technicians to use it. We are Goodyear certified auto service retailers, and we believe everything we do, from tires to tune-ups, should live up to the most exacting standards of all, yours and ours. Good tires, good service, good people, Goodyear.
A day in the sun, a friend by your side, feeling the magic, taking a ride. Life's as good as it gets. What you gonna do now? Disney World. Disney World. I'm going to Disney World.
Blast off with The Rocketeer, the movie CBS TV calls high-flying star-spangled entertainment with great style and great fun. Look, and the critics are calling it dynamite summer fun for the whole family. Sneak preview says it's the good time adventure classic we've been waiting for. As Rolling Stone raves, it's more than one of the best films of the summer. It's the kind of movie magic we don't see much anymore.
Starts Friday at a theater near you.
Buy your car now, and Toyota dealers will hit your hot button. On Camry, a Consumer's Digest Best Buy. Hit option package savings and factory-to-dealer incentives that add up to great savings. Plus, their special financing, dealer discounts, lease deals, and immediate delivery. Hot buttons? You got them with reliable Camrys. And Toyota dealers have more Camrys than ever. See your Toyota dealer now and let him push your buttons.
The 50s were, as you look at some of the old tapes, it seemed a very innocent time and an almost naive time, and one we look back rather longingly at. And yet there was in television, certainly, as in other art forms, there was kind of a black cloud, I guess we could call it, and that is the whole blacklisting that was going on. There were a lot of pressures on producers to eliminate certain people from certain shows. You had to come under some pressure in that regard. And I've written some things I've read some things you've written on the subject, and you very candidly don't sound very proud of the way you reacted to some of those pressures in some cases.
Well, none of us were heroes, and anybody who claims that he was isn't around. Yes, this was the McCarthy period, which basically was 50 to 58, strongest in 53, 54, 55, and the United States was in a hysterical mood of fear. A book was written at that time called The Big Fear, and this was, we were terrified of the communist menace. There was Joe McCarthy weaved a very strong spell, and you know, he would raise up a piece of paper and say, I have here the names of 45 communists in the State Department, and nobody would have to look at that list. And it was a time when sponsors were frightened, networks were frightened, and the House Un-American Affairs Committee was going after first communists. But the problem became the definition of what is a communist. What is a communist sympathizer?
It became very broad. And now, what form would these pressures take on you?
Well, when you say broad, I mean, it would be, there were several books put out, and the principal one was Red Channels, where they would list anybody that they said was a communist, and then you had a clearance department at every network. And they would, every time you went to book somebody, you'd have to send it to the clearance department, so that people who were, in my opinion, fairly innocent, quite innocent, were blacklisted, and nobody ever told you why. I mean, if you were on that blacklist, you were simply told, the network would say, tell the person he's not, don't say anything. Just say you can't book him, but don't ever tell him he's on that blacklist.
So who would come to you? Someone from the network would come to you and say
you
that?
call him. You could say, yes, we'd like to book Harry Belafonte. They'd say, forget it. We want to book Abe Burrows. No, you can't do it. I want to book Leonard. We have a mystery guest spot. Want to book Leonard Bernstein. No, not cleared. See.
So what could you have done? What in retrospect, you wish you had done?
What we did ultimately is I began, in certain instances, we found, for example, Henry Morgan was in Red Channel. And when the show was sponsored by one of Camel cigarettes, or one branch of Camel cigarettes, Winston, I think. The tobacco company called up and said, you got to get rid of Henry Morgan. And I knew Henry's background. I knew that he was a liberal, just about that, probably a Democrat, certainly not a communist. As a matter of fact, he was having problems with his wife because she was quite involved with radical politics, and he couldn't stand her politics, and we could get rid of her. So here he was in Red Channels. This is, you know, kind of super irony, and was going to be blackballed. So that was the first time I really stood up. But I went to Gary Moore, who was from Baltimore, and a Republican. And I said, Gary, they want to kick Henry Morgan off the show. And I'm willing to say, I will not deliver the show if you're willing to say you won't perform. He said, I'm with you. So we went to the cigarette people and said, we won't deliver the show without Henry Morgan. And they backed up. And that was what I meant by beginning to stand up. And we did that several times down the line, and more and more and more, they began to listen.